There has been a massive Elden Ring DLC news drop. Recently, a group of content creators were given the opportunity to play 3 hours of the DLC. A lot of the information that came from this gave us more insight into the leveling system, new weapon classes, locations, and much more. I'm very surprised by the sheer volume of information that is being provided, close to only 2 weeks before release. I will not be discussing any story related spoilers since I too plan on playing and going in as blind as possible. Now, before we get started, I want to say thank you for watching. Now let's get right into it. Courtesy of Okami13 on Twitter, along with the gameplay from these glorious individuals. As you all most likely know by now, the Shadow of the Erd Tree is FromSoft's most expansive DLC to date. There will be 10 plus main bosses along with additional side bosses. The map will be more densely packed, assumingly than what we already have in base Elden Ring. About 100 new weapons, 8 brand new weapon classes. The DLC is reportedly around 30 to 40 hours in length. The map is roughly in equal size to Limgrave, the Weeping Peninsula, and a portion of Caelid. I'm assuming you all remember the Lion Dancer. Well, now it has an official name, the Divine Beast Dancing Lion. This boss is supposed to act as an early game check, similar to the Tree Sentinel in the opening areas. Or maybe not the opening areas, but I think from what the gameplay we have seen, it's in what is called the Bellrat Settlement Tower. So this statement right here kind of conflicts with what I seen from Vati's gameplay, where Mesmer's big magma flame golem, he was more of like the open area tree sentinel of the DLC. But we'll have to see. If I had to guess, I think both are equally true. I just think that the Divine Dancing Beast is probably more of a progression check as opposed to the fire golem open area tree sentinel. The enemies are faster and more agile. The new leveling system, the Shadow Realm Blessing. These are consumables kind of like the Sacred Tears and the Golden Seeds that are upgradable. It seems like it's more of a beginner's type of thing where it reduces incoming damage while increases output damage. I'm not sure how useful this will be to veteran players or people who are already pretty decent as Soulsborne. I don't know if this will make it any easier or if this is intended for the actual game experience. We don't know yet. A lot of the people who have played these 3 hours of gameplay kind of make it seem like they don't really know either. At least nobody I've seen really seems to know. And with that, that is the general information overview of what we've know so far from these 3 hours. What information was confirmed, what information has recently been brought to light. So firstly, what I want to discuss and what I'm honestly most excited for above all else that has been revealed so far is the 8 weapon classes. Now these 8 weapon classes, they look insane. They look crazy. Okay, so before I get too excited, let's actually go over what they are. We have the light great swords, great katanas, hand-to-hand combat, beast claws, thrusting shields, perfume bottles, reverse hand swords, and throwing weapons. So let's go on ahead and break down each of these classes. So the light great swords. These light great swords seem to have the range of great swords, but have the dexterity and swiftness of a straight sword. So it's that nice middle ground where you get the best of both worlds. Now, the movesets on the light great swords seems bizarre. You slash fast, your range seems to be, as previously mentioned, the length of a great sword. And the light great sword specifically shown in the gameplay is called Milady. Now, Milady, to me, the L2 of Milady looks very similar to a boss type of moveset. Everything in this DLC, as previously mentioned, feels sped up. It feels faster. It feels like the impact is harder. Everything feels extremely well. It feels strong. It feels powerful. And which is why I say it almost looks like a boss moveset. Okay, so actually, quick correction. I said the L2, the quick slashes and how it elegantly moves through the air, those don't look to be L2s. Those look to be just the R1 standard when two-handing. This weapon class has massive potential. I can see it being very viable in a lot of PvP builds. For instance, look at the Claymore. The Claymore is a very universally just great weapon across all the Soulsborne, and that has nice range, solid quick move set. Usually you don't got to do a ton to the Claymore, especially in Elden Ring, to make it a very viable PvP weapon. So I could very much see light great swords possibly even overtaking something like the claymore and other great swords that are more commonly used. Now on to the great katanas. This is a type of weapon that I actually didn't even really consider. If I had to guess, the great katanas might be something like the tachi or some other long form Japanese blades that I simply just don't know about. But really, the great katanas, as I mentioned, is something that I didn't really even consider being a possibility, considering katanas are already pretty compact weapons as is, and then Nagakiba is pretty much a great katana. I mean, it's a very long one, to say the least. I don't know if it's really fair to say that, though, considering the great katanas could be more thicker, they could be heavier, though most likely actually be heavier if I had to guess. It all around is a very mysterious, I guess, weapon class, you could say. There is no great katanas gameplay to my knowledge, but if there is, I will insert some over top of this segment. But overall, I do think the great katanas will be a very interesting weapon, both in, again, PvE and PvP. Everything here will be, I think, a big game changer to how just the entire fundamental core of what the game was with its already base classes. I think it will just be completely blown out of proportion. But next we have the hand-to-hand combat. Now, this is one that I've seen a lot of people excited for, because you don't really get the box much in Souls. I mean, you really don't. You do have fist weapons, but you don't actually get to use your fist. You're not doing any kind of fighting styles. The hand-to-hand combat has so much potential to be very unique. It can incorporate real-world fighting styles. It's so many interesting possibilities. It could make kicking more viable. Maybe you won't just do one of those weak 5 damage kicks. Maybe you'll do a side kick or something more higher damage. Maybe you'll be able to buff with certain greases, certain incantations, and sorceries. There is a lot of possibility with hand-to-hand combat. Now, once again, this is another one that has not been, to my knowledge, shown in these 3 hours of footage. However, we do have gameplay footage from the first trailer that kind of gives us an idea of how we'll be moving. A lot of these classes look like they're going to be more up in the air, a lot of more sporadic movements. It's going to be very fast-paced. I can very much see it being, once again, a game changer. Everything here looks like it moves faster than most of the base weapon classes in the game pre-established so far. Next, we have the Beast Claws. Now, the Beast Claws, they look very different. I don't know how else to say it. They look unbelievably quick. They look very quick. I mean, if you even look at the gameplay shown, you zip from one side to the other to leaping up in the air. It is by far the most sporadic I've seen out of any of the weapons. It looks bizarre. I keep using the word bizarre because that is the only thing. It looks otherworldly. It looks like something that the Misbegottens would use. Some very fast, very sporadic, just very quick claws. It is called the Beast Claws for a reason. Now, I'm interested to see how many different types of Beast Claws there will be if we will have something like the Raptor Talons, or even the Misbegotten Talons, or maybe some other creature's talons. I'm very interested to see how this is implemented in the game and how many different versions of it. Next, we got the thrusting shields. You know, the thrusting shields actually kind of remind me something similar to the Crucible Knight's shield, where you do a shield bash and can ram and possibly even eject an enemy up into the air. If I had to guess, that is something that I'm kind of thinking that the thrusting shields will be, but of course with unique aspects, probably different elemental versions. You could probably put grease on the base versions. Very standard stuff. I'm hoping this will make shields a lot more viable and more interesting to use. I'm sure counter and parry builds will be pretty good with the thrusting shields. As a person who doesn't use shields all too often, the thrusting shield is probably the least interesting, I guess. But I'm hoping that it will be something crazy. I hope it will break the game. I hope it's something that will get my attention, get people's attention. But now we're on to the perfume bottles. Now, the perfume bottles previously are used as they're kind of like buffing items that you can craft in the base game. So the perfume bottles definitely remind me of the perfumer enemy types that is in the village of the Albinorix, which I think from the new gameplay we've seen, the perfume bottles, they have look like different elements. So you have frost, assumingly fire, probably poison, maybe even scarlet rot, which will give a big boost to scarlet rot builds since we have so few already. The perfume bottles by far the most out of left field. I don't think anybody expected perfume bottles to be a actual weapon. So that's going to be very exciting to use. If I had to guess, the perfume bottles probably scale with faith, so that gives faith another viable, more interesting weapon. Actually, I would go as far to say that the perfume bottles are an entire class built specifically for faith, if this is true anyway, going off the assumption this is faith scaling specifically. Now for our new second to last class, we have the reverse hand swords. Now these look like these would be good for build-up. For their R1, the end chain is very similar to the power stancing of 2 curved swords. So I'm wondering how that will fit into the meta. Curved swords are very strong and at times even broken as is. It makes me wonder if the reverse hand swords will still get outclassed or if they will carve out their own place in the meta, both PvE and PvP. But we'll have to see when the game actually comes out what different varieties and different types and how they will be integrated into the build. At the very least, they are very stylish and look cool. And lastly, we have throwing weapons. Now the throwing weapon we've seen in the gameplay is a hand axe. So I'm sure there'll be other throwable weapons as we progress the DLC, but I think it's a very unique class. It's great to have another range class that isn't bows, because as you all probably know, bows are not that great. Some of them are, but it's usually their Ash of War, not really the bow itself. You can't really rely on bows for long range combat, to say the least. I can see throwing weapons being more dexterity based, or depending on what specific throwing weapon it is, it could be maybe scaled towards other stats as opposed to just strictly dexterity. But if I had to guess, most of them will be dexterity based. And with that, that is all the new weapon classes. They all look amazing, and I'm very excited to get to try all of them and play with all of them. If I have to go by what is my favorite, I would probably say my top 3 is the light greatsword, the perfume bottles, and the beast claws. They look the most interesting and diverse for my personal playstyle. Now, there are many new incantations and sorceries. However, we did not receive any gameplay regarding any of the incantations, which there's supposed to be over 10, and then we only have gameplay on about 2 of the sorceries, if I'm not mistaken. From what I can gather, the incantations themselves are not that great, and a lot of the sorceries are pretty decent. Sorceries always tend to outclass incantations, unfortunately. That's kind of par for the course. Since I don't have a lot of information on these incantations, nor do I have gameplay, I recommend checking out Yui, since he kind of goes over a lot of the more nitty-gritty of what these incantations and sorceries may look like. And I will eventually cover these in a later video when the DLC is actually out and I am able to feasibly show and basically give a better idea. As of Ashes of War, we do have one in particular that has been shown and has been on basically everybody's mind since the DLC has been revealed. The Crucible Wings, or more specifically, the name of it is Aspect of the Crucible Wings. Now in the gameplay, you see the wings emerge and then you do a spinning attack against the dancer. Now, when you use it this way, it leaves a lot of openings for the enemy to attack and you to receive damage, but you do get hyper armor, I believe around 30 hyper armor, if I'm not mistaken, to pull off this Ash of War. Now, if you have the vigor to withstand the attacks, this should not be that much of a problem. Now, where this Ash of War arguably truly shines is that depending on the weapon class you are using, when you use this incantation, the animation is different. So for example, the boss enemy Crucible Knights usually fly up and then they try to dive for a pierce attack, straight pierce attack. So in the first trailer, we see a Tarnish using a thrusting shield, and when he does use the wings, he flies up and then it looks like he crashes down onto Mesmer. So we can assume whatever weapon this Ash of War is selected on will basically do just different things, similar to like if we had a greatsword, we would probably charge and fly into the enemy like the boss Crucible Knights do. I can't really see this being practical in a PvP sense, but maybe in a PvE it can be pretty good. Maybe it has high stagger damage, maybe it procs bleed or frost a lot quicker than other methods. Either way, I think it is a very interesting and unique Ash of War that is a good addition to the game, regardless of how necessarily useful or meta changing it is. There are a few new talismans that will be available in Shadow of the Erd Tree. There is a Arc heirloom. Now, if you know, there's the other heirlooms that buff intelligence, faith, strength, etc. We're now getting a Arc one, along with two new talismans called Rilana's Cameo and the Crusade Insignia. So to start off, let's talk about Rilana's Cameo. This talisman boosts stance-based damage. So anything like Unsheathed, Sword of Night and Flame, any stance-based Ash of Wars will receive the benefit of this talisman. To be precise, it's actually an attack boost of 15%, which is massive. It's pretty nuts to say the least. So then there's the Crusade Insignia. This talisman boosts weapon damage after every kill by 10%. Now, that may sound like a lot on paper, which it is. Assuming it stacks up to 3 or 4 times, that's still 40% boost after taking out multiple enemies. Can see this being pretty useful and possibly broken if you can, let's say, go take out 3 or 4 enemies before you walk into a boss, which notoriously, before you go into a boss in a Soulsborne, there's usually quite a few enemies. And even if there aren't, depending on how long the buff lasts for, let's say it's 15 to 30 seconds, that may be enough time to scrape out quite a lot of damage on top of other stacked buffs like incantations or your wondrous physics. So these new talismans are seemingly pretty useful so far, and possibly even game breaking on top of what we already have. And lastly, we are on to the final gameplay addition that has been discussed among this 3-hour playtest. We have deflecting. Now, if you don't know what deflecting is, it's basically a perfect guard or 100% guard. If I were to give an example, it would be something very similar to Sekiro's perfect guard. When you parry at the right moment, you take no damage, and you can even stagger or knock back an enemy to a certain degree. From what I understand, that is what the deflecting is. So apparently it is a tier, and you can equip it part of your physic. Now, I can see this being pretty game changing, to be honest. Having perfect parries actually would make a lot of parry builds more viable. It would make pairing in general with this game a lot more fun and viable to do. Now, where you get this tier is apparently from the massive fire golem that is walking around in the overworld, the tree sentinel, so to speak. According to reports, this is not a boss, this is just a large overworld enemy. So I guess that kind of makes sense why previously the dancer was kind of meant to be the tree sentinel, so to speak. But yes, you do get the tier from that golem. We'll be able to access it basically right out the gates going into the DLC, which is quite nice. It definitely will make it easier for people to obtain it and basically get an idea and see how it works. And with that, that is going to do it for all the latest gameplay information on the DLC. I am unbelievably excited to jump into the Shadow of the Erd Tree. If you all would like to see more Elden Ring content, along with other Soulsborne and RPG content, make sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay up to date on my latest videos. I do plan on making videos on the DLC, so I hope you all will join me there. And with that all being said, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care of yourselves out there.